welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessica. I will be your host today, and I am here with the author of a book called Negative Girl, which I only have positive things to say about. I know, I can't help it. I'm like in complete pun dad joke mode today for some reason. So I do apologize to our listeners as well. This is a really good book. This is like, I believe it is a neo-noir is what it is being, spoken about. It's got a lot of music references, and it has some really interesting characters in it. And I wanted to know everything about them. So why don't you introduce yourself, because I have yet to do that yet. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your name, and tell us about Negative Girl.
So I'm Libby Cudmore, the author of Negative Girl and The Big Rewind. Goodness, I'm trying to think what about myself. I've written a lot of short stories with these characters. They first appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine and have also appeared in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine and Tough, among others.
So the characters that we're talking about Martin, who was a rock musician at one point, had some, maybe not like the most successful, but had success in his rock band. And Valerie, who is his assistant, who is a lover of music, especially like Steely Dan, which is that's where the name of the book comes from.
Yes, it comes from their album Two Against Nature, which I listened to a lot when I was writing the first drafts.
That's one of my favorite albums, Two Against Nature. Actually,
really?
I have like some personal love for it myself. But yeah, so it is based on a Steely Dan song is the name of the book, Negative Girl. And Valerie is a huge fan of music. She and her brother Deacon, who was named also after a Steely Dan
after Deacon
song,
Blues, yes,
are they're orphaned. They both lost their parents. Music is sort of her connection, and she finds herself as the assistant for Martin Wade, as we talked about before, who was a rock musician turned private eye. And it is just a really well put together story. The town is upstate New York. It is full of characters that you would want in a noir story, and it's got a mystery that revolves around Martin and his former bandmate, who he's been estranged from for a while. So you had mentioned that you have written about these characters before in short story form. Did you always have the plot of Negative Girl in your mind? Did you always know that you were going to visit them in long?
Well, when I started writing Negative Girl, it was originally just from Valerie's POV, and there were a couple different cases that they went through. I'd always joked about writing like Effie Perrine PI, that I wanted to write from the assistant's point of view, but Emily Edwards actually did that better than I ever could with her Viviana Valentine series. And I couldn't get it going. It just wasn't clicking. And so I wrote a short story called All Shook Down from Martin's POV, and I sent it to Ellery Queen just kind of on a whim. I was like, well, I really enjoyed writing this. I enjoyed writing for him. And they bought it. It was my first sale to Ellery Queen. And I thought, okay, there's something here. And so I started writing a new draft of the book, sort of introducing the mystery about the disappearance of his ex-fiance, and talking about some of his band members. And that opened up sort of the missing piece of the story and allowed me to write the version that you're seeing here.
It was really good, as I mentioned before, and the pacing was just perfect for this type of story. So when you were kind of putting the mystery of everybody together, What types of mysteries kind of inspired you to bring their story to life and to kind of write about this type of like private eye situation?
Well, I come out of the private eye genre. That's where I started. I read The Long Goodbye in college and was always sort of intrigued specifically by the private investigator as a sort of contemporary knight. And so I had always wanted to write one. And my first book, The Big Rewind, which came out from William Morrow in 2016, had an amateur sleuth. But like I said, I'd wanted to write someone professional. And I've joked the sort of two main influences on this book were Raymond Chandler and Bob Muir's Trouble Boys about the replacements. And I was sort of like, it was kind of like, what if Paul Westerberg played Philip Marlowe? And that kind of solidified everything I needed to know about Martin Wade.
So what about Valerie? Because she is as big of a character as Martin. And it's funny that you say that, originally you were thinking just from Valerie's point of view. I would read anything from her point of view. She had a really good voice and I really felt for her. But Martin's story was also extremely appealing, and you did a really good job of just letting their voices just take the story where it needed to go, how they were both circling this mystery in different ways. So where did you start hearing Martin's voice?
So it's funny. As I said, it took me a little while. I'd always pictured Martin, sort of the prototype for all of my male detectives has always been the actor Jay Carnes, who played Dutch Wagenbach on The Shield. He was on Sons of Anarchy. I just think he's very handsome. He's very elegant. He's got a certain just gravitas to him. So every line of dialogue that I wrote in Martin's voice was sort of in his, which came in very handy because I asked him to record the audiobook reading for Martin, and he said yes. So, which was very, very lovely of him. And I think he does a really great job.
That's so huge for you. I was going to ask about the audiobook itself. That must have been so exciting.
It was so exciting.
When that happened.
I was when I first he called and sort of read a part to me, and I started crying on the phone, which was a little undignified, but really just you're hearing your character really come to life, and that was really fun. So
this particular story again deals with a mystery that brings back, as we mentioned, somebody from Martin's past who he's been estranged from, and she kind of comes in, or he kind of comes in. There's two people. I don't want to give it away and what the connection is, but basically he has to confront a lot of things. As you mentioned, Martin has an ex, Cecilia, who disappeared, and you get a little bit more information about Cecilia's disappearance as time goes on. I do have to ask if that name is a reference, though, to the song Cecilia from Simon and Garfunkel.
yes, I've always named all of my characters, or the majority of them, after songs. So Gina, Aunt Gina,
Yeah.
Valerie's aunt, is named for another Steely Dan song, Lunch with Gina. Valerie is named for the song that Amy Winehouse and Mark Ronson covered, and also the Steve Winwood song. And there was a character in The Big Rewind, Gloria, who is named for the Laura Branigan song. It's just something I pull from. A lot of times I'll be starting a story and I'll be like, I need a name for this character, and a song will come up. I'll be like, that's a cool name.
So I want to talk a little bit about more about just the role of music in your writing in a minute. But there is this background for Martin where there's Cecilia's gone. You find out a little bit more about that as the story goes on, but you also have just the haunting of his own addiction issues.
Mm-hmm.
And his relationship to former bandmates. And I guess, you obviously you're a big you know a lot about this. Was, other than Paul Westerberg, was there just sort of like relationships between different musicians in history that you kind of pulled from when you were writing what you would imagine that reunion would be like?
No, but I've definitely had friends come out of my past that we've had complicated relationships and having to re-navigate them. And thinking about, you know, reaching out to people and realizing like maybe it's not in their best interest or in my best interest. So nostalgia is, of all the, the talk of drugs and addictions and things in this book, nostalgia is probably the most deadly.
I love that because as somebody who falls into the nostalgia trap
Oh
myself,
yeah.
especially, I mean, like when I first got the info about this book from the publisher and they were, kind of shopping it to do an interview with you, automatically I see Gen X and I see, like music, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
oh, yes, absolutely. This is the book that I want to read. So, in a way, you fall into the nostalgia trap because I think a lot of people tend to, I guess they like to maybe idealize a time in the past where they like to say that things were better for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, and it's like I fall back in my college years right now. My 20-year college reunion is coming up and it's just like, oh, things were better then. Like, yeah, because you didn't have to like maintain a whole household and you
Yeah.
could, you didn't have to really feed yourself or do I like of course it was better. You were 21. Like
Yeah. But at the same time, I think just kind of throwing like out just things about like music and stuff, an argument I always used to have with my parents, being a music person and them, loving music, is that when, people will say things like, oh, music was just better when I was a kid. And I don't necessarily adhere to that because I feel like that's very dismissive, like it was very important to you because it was relevant to what you were going through at that moment, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something recent that you might like. And it almost becomes an obsession. And
yeah.
being that Martin has left the music industry and his friend is still finding, I don't want to say moderate success, but is still doing things within it. It was just kind of interesting looking at nostalgia through that way, because what happens, and again, I do not want to talk too much about the mystery because I was actually really surprised at the way that things went.
Oh, thank you.
But what happens is you have these two people, they're brought together by a tragedy. One of them has to do with, has his own tragedy in his past and is trying to investigate this tragedy. And their toxicities kind of start to come out again. And in that way, nostalgia can be very, as you mentioned, it could be very much like a drug. You're chasing the high of something that either never happened the way that you remember it, or maybe
Hmm.
happens terribly. And then on the other side, you have Valerie, who's running from something that happened to her. And you have the person who the heart of this particular mystery is about, who wasn't necessarily who she was letting on to. So there's just, I think, a lot about just everybody's dual lives here,
Hmm.
and what they're choosing to give, what they're choosing to remember, and how it affects everybody around them.
Absolutely. And that's kind of that was really the fun part in writing this book is figuring out, what these characters have in their lives that they might not want anybody else to know about, or what they're trying to either run from or re-embrace. Because there's always two sides of looking at your past. You can either get too heavy into it, but you can also run too far from it. And it's about, from a healthy living standpoint, you want to find that balance between it. But that doesn't make for very good fiction. That doesn't create tension or drama. So we want to push these characters to extremes.
So what I want to know is, did you know how this was going to end when you started writing it?
I didn't know how it was going to end when I finished writing it, because I ended up changing the ending considerably between the draft that my agent, Jim McCarthy, read and was like, this looks good, maybe tweak these things, and the draft that we sent out to Datura. So things can change very quickly, which again was really fun. And then going back and having to like thread those things in. I very famously never know how a case is going to turn out. I did that in the Big Rewind too, where I didn't know who the killer was until 3/4 of the way through the book, and then thought, I should probably wrap this up at some point.
Will we see these characters again?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Thank you. I do have 2 other stories coming out in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, so we will see them at least 2 more times. And I'd love, that depends on how the book does and what people say about it. But I would love to write another book. I'd love to let everyone know about the night Cecilia went missing. There's still a lot that I want to wrap
I
up.
want to know about that too.
Well, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh no! Well, everybody buy this book because we all need to know about it. So I wanted to just come back really quickly before we close out, just to talk about, I mentioned I wanted to discuss the role of music while you write. Do you listen to music while you write? Does it change the course of what you're writing?
Absolutely. I am a very big collector of vinyl and used to have a sort of a record show on Twitter where I'd play through a whole album and discuss it. And so I get up every morning and I put on a record, and it changes sometimes. Sometimes it's just what I'm feeling that day. Sometimes if I know I'm going to have to write like a Martin specific scene, it might be something like Elvis Costello or The Replacements. If I have to write a Valerie specific scene, lately I'd written that she loves Steely Dan, which she still does, but I'm like in a weird way sort of pivoting towards making her a little more of a hipster in later books. So lately, Valerie has been listening to Franz Ferdinand and the Killers, which is definitely like, that's my nostalgia. That was from, when I was in my 20s. So she would have listened to it about in high school.
So do you have anything I have to ask that you recommend people listen to while they're reading your book? Do you have a playlist?
I actually do. I've created a playlist. I can pop that in the chat if you would like.
So listeners, I am going to be including this playlist in our show notes when we drop this episode. So it'll be both in the YouTube show notes. We'll put a little quote about it, and also if you're getting this from a podcatcher, it should be in the show notes on the Turn the Page website. So excited to hear this.
Yes, and this is every song that has been included in the series. So this is the series as well as the book, and they are in order.
That is
how they appear.
So Libby, I do want to know how you got into writing.
My parents will say that I probably always did. I mean, I know that my parents have like little stories that I wrote when I was a kid, but when I was in 5th grade, I had a dream that I'd written a book, and I think that was when I knew that that's what I wanted to do. My dad was a writer. He just published his 3rd book, The Cave Electrician's Widow, which is about the only 2 people to die in Howe Caverns, which again, like, I'm an upstate girl through and through, and I get that from my dad. So I think it was always something that I knew I wanted to do and saw as a viable pathway. I was really lucky that my parents modeled storytelling and publishing as something that, could be done.
Yeah, so Negative Girl is out in the world already, and I understand you are going to be coming nearby us soon. So
Yes.
if people want to like meet you in person who live nearby here, where can they go, and when are your appearances?
I'm going to be at Q and Willow Books, and actually Alex Segura, whose work was a huge influence on this book. He'll be interviewing me Saturday, November 2nd, at Q and Willow in Queens.
Very good. Well, Alex Segura is also a friend of the show and a personal
Yes.
friend of Jen Jordan, who is one of our other interviewers. So, hi, Alex.
Yes, he's
Yeah.
wonderful and been a huge supporter from the beginning. So,
So,
and that's at 7 p.m. I should clarify.
so go check that out. Check out Negative Girl from your local library, your
Absolutely.
favorite bookstore, your retailer, wherever you prefer to get your books. And we hope to see more of these characters. Thank you so much,
Thank
Libby.
you. Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.